Why emotionally intelligent? People get called cold by the people who love them. There is a specific silence that happens in a kitchen. Someone you love has just said something sharp, something that landed, and the room is waiting. You feel the whole thing arrive in your chest, the heat of it, the unfairness of it, the exact place where it hooked. And then you do what you have always done. You breathe. You put the heat down somewhere behind your ribs. You look at the person who said it and you say in a level voice that you understand why they feel that way, and you ask what they need. And they get angrier. Not less angry. Angrier. Because to them, what just happened in the kitchen was not care. It was distance. They threw something at you and it did not land anywhere they could see. You stayed smooth. You stayed reasonable. You gave them understanding when they were asking for a reaction, and understanding offered at that particular moment felt like being handled by a professional instead of being loved by a person. Later, when the fight has a name, the word arrives. Cold, detached, clinical, emotionally unavailable. You are told that you never seem to feel anything, and the sentence lands on the one person in the room who was feeling the most. Most people would say this is a communication problem. Two styles, badly matched, one loud and one quiet, and with the right vocabulary it resolves. None of that is the mechanism. This is not a mismatch of styles. It is what occurs when a nervous system was trained so early and so well to metabolize other people's emotions that it lost the ability to display its own in real time. You are not withholding. You are converting. And the conversion is so fast, so practiced, so invisible from the outside, that what reaches the other person is only the finished product. Calm, insight, a reasonable next step. Never the raw material. Never the cost. The people who love you are not lying about what they experience. They really do meet a wall. What they cannot see is that the wall is made of everything you already absorbed on their behalf. What follows has 4 parts. The exact mechanism that turns feeling into composure before anyone can witness it. Where that mechanism was installed, and why it was necessary. What it does to the people closest to you, and what it does to a person whose states are never reported while they are happening. And last, what warmth looks like when you are no longer required to be the calmest person in every room. The part that changes something is not the diagnosis. It is the last turn, and it will not make sense without everything before it. The moment you became the calm one. Think about the last time you were genuinely upset and nobody knew. Not a small irritation. Something real. A comment that reframed how you thought someone saw you, or a decision made about your life without you in the room. Reconstruct the first 60 seconds. There is a spike. There is a flood of heat somewhere between the throat and the stomach, and then, almost immediately, something else starts running underneath it, and that something is not suppression. It is analysis. Within seconds, you are already asking why they said it. You are already noticing they have been under pressure for weeks. You are already locating the moment in their history that this behavior comes from. You are already constructing the version of events in which their action makes complete sense and requires no confrontation. That is the mechanism. And it is important to be precise about what it is, because most descriptions of it are wrong. It is not that you feel less. Every measure of this pattern points the other way. The people who get called cold are usually running higher emotional load, not lower. They feel the spike, and they feel the other person's spike, and they feel the shape of the whole room at once. What is unusual is not the volume of feeling. It is the speed of the processing. Emotion for most people has a lag. Something happens, they feel it, they show it, and then later, sometimes much later, they understand it. Showing comes before understanding. That order is what makes emotion legible to other people. The face moves, the voice changes. Someone in the room can see the weather and respond to it. For you, that order got reversed. Understanding arrived first. The comprehension is so fast that it overtakes the display. By the time your face would have shown something, your mind has already produced a full explanation, and the explanation has already reduced the charge. The feeling is real. It just gets metabolized before it becomes visible, and this is the part that has consequences. From the outside, An emotion that was processed and an emotion that was never felt look identical. There is no observable difference. Both look like a level voice and a steady face and a reasonable question. Nobody in the kitchen can tell the difference between a person who did not care and a person who cared so much that they handled it in 4 seconds, which means the people around you are not reading you badly. They are reading the only thing you gave them to read. You give them the output. They assume there was no process. And the more skilled you become at the conversion, the more complete the illusion of absence becomes. Competence at this makes you less visible, not more. Sit with that for a moment. The better you got at feeling accurately, the harder you became to see. And there is a further question waiting underneath it, one that most people never ask, because the pattern feels like personality. Where did a nervous system learn to process that fast, and what was it processing? What regulation looks like from the outside? There is a translation problem at the center of this, and it is worth naming exactly. You have a word for what you do. The word is regulation. You experience something, you contain it, you keep the room stable, you respond rather than react. In your own account of yourself, this is a skill, and probably your best one. It is what makes you the person other people call first when something breaks. It is why you never say the thing that cannot be taken back. The people who love you have a different word for the same behavior. They call it withholding. Both words describe the same observable event. Something happened and you did not visibly change. The words diverge entirely on the question of intent. Regulation means the feeling was there and you carried it. Withholding means the feeling was there and you kept it from them on purpose. And because intent is invisible, the person watching has to guess. Under stress, in the middle of a conflict, with their own nervous system flooded, they guess the version that matches what they are already afraid of. Consider what conflict actually is for most people. It is not an argument about facts. It is a search for evidence that they still matter to you. The raised voice is not the point. The point is to produce a reaction, because a reaction proves that the other person is affected, and being affected is the only proof of connection most people trust. Emotional impact is how they verify that they are inside your life rather than beside it. So when someone escalates and you steady, you have removed the one instrument they know how to read. You are not refusing to fight. You are refusing to be visibly moved, which to them is the same as not being moved at all. They push harder, not because they want to hurt you, but because they are searching for the edge of you and cannot find it, and you interpret the escalation as proof that calm was the right choice. Look how out of control they are. Look how necessary it was that one of you stayed level. You steady harder, they push harder. Each of you is doing the thing that makes the other person's behavior worse, and both of you are certain you are the one holding the relationship together. Understand what this loop costs. It does not end in an explosion. It ends in a conclusion. They stop looking for the edge of you and decide it is not there. That is the sentence that arrives months later, delivered flat, without heat. You never really let me in. By then, it does not feel like a fight. It feels like a finding. And still nobody has asked the more useful question, which is not whether calm is good or bad, but what calm was originally for. The difference between composure and absence. There are two things that look the same in a doorway, and the distinction between them is the whole of this. The first is composure. Composure is presence under load. The feeling is fully occupied, fully inhabited, and simply not permitted to drive. A person in composure is heavier, not lighter. There is something dense in the room with you. The second is absence. Absence is what happens when the feeling has been routed away from the body entirely and processed somewhere it cannot be reached. The room is lighter. Nothing is being carried because the thing that would have been carried was converted into an explanation before it reached the muscles. You believe you are doing the first. Very often you are doing the second, and you cannot tell from inside. Here is how to test it. Recall a conversation where someone told you something painful about your own behavior. You listened well. You did not defend yourself. You asked good questions. You thanked them for telling you. Now try to remember what your body was doing. Not what you thought. Not what you concluded. Where the tension sat. Whether your hands were warm. Whether your jaw moved. whether you were breathing into your chest or your stomach. If there is nothing there, that is the answer. Absence is retroactively invisible. Composure leaves a physical memory because the body was in the room. Absence leaves only the transcript. This is why the accusation lands so badly and yet keeps recurring. When someone says you were cold, you scan your memory and find a great deal of feeling, so you know the accusation is false. What you are scanning is the record of your interpretation, which was rich and detailed and full of care. You are not scanning the record of your presence because there is no record. The thing they missed was never stored. And the strangest part is that the people who do this are often the ones most convinced of their own emotional depth. The depth is real. It is simply located in the analysis rather than the encounter. You know more about what happened in that room than anyone else who was in it, and you were the least there. Which raises the question that this whole pattern has been protecting. What would have happened once if you had stayed in the room with the feeling instead of leaving to understand it? Where you learned that reacting was dangerous. Nobody develops this by accident. Processing speed of this kind is not temperament. It is training, and training requires a reason. The reason is almost always that somewhere early, one person's emotional state determined the weather for everyone else, and the cost of misreading that weather was too high to risk. The environment does not have to have been violent. This installs just as reliably in houses where nothing was ever thrown. What is required is unpredictability with consequences. A parent whose mood shifted without warning and whose mood decided whether the evening was safe. A caregiver who withdrew rather than raged, so that the punishment for a wrong move was not a shout, but 3 days of a closed face. A sibling whose crisis consumed all available attention, so that having a need of your own was arithmetically impossible. In an environment like that, a child solves the problem the only way a child can, not by predicting the adult, which is a different adaptation with a different result, but by editing the self. You discover that your reaction is the variable you actually control. A visible tear extends the evening. A raised voice guarantees the closed face. Frustration on your own face gets read as insolence, and the conversation stops being about whatever it was about. So you stop letting anything reach the surface, and you find that the room stays survivable, and you conclude correctly for that house that the safest face is the one that shows nothing arriving, and the second half of the solution is the part that matters here. Prediction only works if your own reaction does not interfere with the reading. A child who cries loses access to the information. A child who gets angry escalates the very state they were trying to manage. A child who has a visible need adds another variable to a system already overloaded. So the reaction gets moved. Not deleted, moved. It goes somewhere internal where it can be examined later, at a safer hour, in private. The processing happens in a room with no one else in it. That is where the reversal was built. Understanding before display, because display was the dangerous part. And it worked. This must be said plainly, because the pattern will not loosen while it is being treated as a flaw. It worked. It kept a child oriented in a house where orientation was survival. It produced accurate readings under pressure that most adults could not manage. The skill was real and the necessity was real. The problem is that survival strategies are not scheduled to end. Nobody comes to tell the system that the house is different now, that the person across the kitchen is not the person whose mood decided everything, that a raised voice in this room does not predict 3 days of silence. The strategy runs on the old data. It reads the current conflict with an instrument calibrated for a house you left 20 years ago. So you regulate a partner who was never going to punish you for a reaction. You absorb a friend's frustration to keep a peace that was never at risk. You handle a situation that did not need handling, and the handling itself becomes the injury. There is one more thing that got built in that house, and it operates on every conversation you have now, usually before you say a single word. The translation: you do before you speak. Watch what happens in the gap between someone finishing a sentence and you beginning yours. To them, the gap is a pause. To you, it is a full operation. In that space, you have already estimated their current capacity. You have already checked what they can hear today, given what they are carrying. You have already located the version of your response that will cost them the least. You have already removed the sharp clause, softened the direct statement, and buried the actual request inside a question that gives them room to decline without losing face. By the time you speak, what comes out is not what you meant. It is what you calculated they could receive. This is the most invisible labor in any relationship, and it is the one most reliably mistaken for its opposite. Because from their side, the smooth version arrives with no evidence of the edit. They hear something measured, considerate, slightly indirect. They do not hear the 3 harder sentences that were tested and discarded in the pause. They do not know that they were protected, so they cannot be grateful for it, and they cannot consent to it either. What they can sense, faintly, is that they are not being spoken to directly. Something in the delivery is too finished. There is a smoothness that does not match the temperature of the topic, and people are extremely good at detecting that particular smoothness, even when they cannot name it. It reads as management. It reads as being handled by someone who has already decided what you can cope with, which is exactly what it is, however kindly it is meant. Be specific about the cost, because it compounds. Every translated sentence teaches the other person that your unedited voice is not available to them. They receive your care in a form that cannot be traced back to caring. Over years, this builds a relationship in which one person has never once been spoken to plainly by the person closest to them, and does not know why intimacy keeps stalling at a certain depth. And you become fluent in a language nobody else in the relationship speaks, the language of your own withheld sentences, spoken to yourself in the private room where the processing happens. There is a version of this that is worse, and it happens when the translation succeeds so completely that your accuracy about the other person becomes the thing they cannot forgive. Why your accuracy feels like judgment. You say the true thing gently and it makes everything worse. This has happened enough times that it has probably become a rule you follow without examining. The scene runs like this. Someone is upset, spiraling, going in circles. You have known for several minutes exactly what is underneath it, because you have been tracking the pattern for years. You wait. You choose the softest possible framing. You offer it. Perhaps this is less about the schedule and more about feeling replaceable. And they go still, and then they go cold, and something closes. The obvious reading is that you were tactless. That is not it. The framing was gentle, and often the observation was correct. What happened is structural, and it has nothing to do with your tone. To be accurately named by someone is to be exposed to them without having chosen it. When you tell a person what is actually happening inside them, you demonstrate that you had access to their interior before they granted it. You were, in that moment, further into them than they were into themselves. That is a power difference, and no amount of gentleness removes it. Being seen through and being seen are separated by consent, and there's a second layer that makes it sting more. When you name their feeling from a position of complete composure, the asymmetry becomes total. They are flooded and legible. You are steady and opaque. They have just been read by someone they cannot read. That is not intimacy. That is being observed. This is the moment the word cold most often gets attached, and it is worth understanding why the word feels right to them. Cold does not mean unfeeling. In this usage it means unreachable while reaching. It means you have your hands inside my experience and I cannot get anywhere near yours. So the accusation is not really about temperature. It is about direction. Everything flows one way. Your understanding travels toward them constantly, and nothing travels back that they can hold on to. So the accuracy is not the problem. The one-way street is, and the reason it stays one way has to do with what happens to you when a conversation moves faster than the other person can follow. The cost of being ahead of the conversation. There is a particular fatigue that comes from always arriving at the point before anyone else does. You see where the argument is going in the second sentence. You know how it resolves. You know which turns will be taken along the way, which grievances will be raised as evidence, which apology will be offered at the end, and what it will be worth. And you still have to sit through the whole thing, because the other person needs to travel the distance in order to arrive. Being ahead sounds like an advantage. Lived daily, it is a form of isolation, and it produces two specific effects that most people carrying this pattern have never separated. The first is that you stop participating and start administering. Once you can see the ending, your role changes. You are no longer in the conversation. You are steering it toward the outcome you already identified, managing the pace, absorbing the parts that would derail it. You have become responsible for the shape of an interaction you are supposedly inside. Nobody can steer an interaction and be inside it at the same time. The second effect is subtler and more corrosive. When you know the ending, your own reaction becomes irrelevant to you. Why feel the sting of a sentence you already saw coming from 4 sentences away? Anticipation dulls impact. The predicted injury arrives pre-processed, and after enough years of accurate prediction, very little arrives that has any edge left on it at all. That is where the flatness comes from, not from feeling too little, from having removed surprise from your emotional life so thoroughly that nothing lands with force. And here is what nobody tells you about surprise. It is the raw material of being affected. To be moved by someone requires that they be able to do something you did not model in advance. If your prediction is good enough, you have made yourself unmovable. And unmovable is precisely what the people who love you experience as coldness. You did not choose distance. You optimized for accuracy, and distance was the price the optimization charged without itemizing it. There is a further step down this path, and it is the one that quietly replaces your entire presence in the room. When understanding replaces participation. Ask what you actually offer people, and the honest answer is likely to be comprehension. You understand them well. Better than most. You track what they are carrying, you remember the shape of their fear. You can predict what will hurt them and steer around it. That is what you bring to a table, and it is genuinely valuable. It is also, functionally, a service. The trouble is what happens when comprehension becomes the only currency you deal in. Understanding another person and being present with them are different acts, and they use the position in the room differently. To understand someone, you have to step back far enough to see the pattern. Perspective requires distance. To be present with someone, you have to be close enough that you cannot see the whole shape, close enough that their state affects yours, close enough to be pulled slightly off balance by what they are going through. Those two positions are mutually exclusive in any given moment. You cannot be at the analytical distance and inside the encounter at the same time. And you have practiced one of them for decades. So the pattern hardens. When something intense happens between you and someone you love, you take the position you are good at. You step back. You see the shape. You offer the shape back, kindly, usefully, and you never once come close enough to be moved. Your contribution to every emotionally significant moment is a perspective delivered from outside the moment, and people can feel the difference between someone who understands them and someone who is with them, even if they have no words for it. They will thank you for the first while grieving the absence of the second. That grief has no legitimate complaint attached to it, which is why it comes out as an unfair accusation months later. There is nothing to point to. You were kind, insightful, patient, right? And they were alone in it. Understanding offered instead of presence is a very sophisticated way of not being there, which leads to something that sounds like a contradiction and is not. The people closest to you may need you to be worse at this before they can trust you. The people who need your mess to trust you. There is a reason intimacy stalls at a particular depth with you, and it is not effort. You have never been the person who fails to try. Closeness is built out of mutual exposure, and exposure has to be roughly symmetrical or it turns into something else. When one person keeps revealing and the other keeps receiving, what develops is not a relationship between equals. It is care in one direction, with a very specific shape. One person becomes the one who needs, the other becomes the one who holds, and the one who needs cannot rest in that. They can accept it for a while gratefully. Then something turns. They begin to feel indebted, then observed, then vaguely ashamed. They have handed over the entire map of their weaknesses to someone who handed over nothing, and however gently that asymmetry is held, it means they are the only one in the room who can be hurt by what the other person knows. The only thing that dissolves that fear is your own exposure. not a summary of a difficulty you have already resolved, not an insight about your childhood delivered from the analytical distance. Something unfinished, something you have not yet made sense of, offered while it is still uncomfortable to say. That is the currency you never learned to spend, because in the house where this was built, spending it was the dangerous move. So you offer the thing you have instead. Reliability, steadiness, depth of understanding, endless availability. And you cannot understand why it does not produce closeness, why people who love you keep saying they do not know you, when you have given them more attention than anyone else in their life has. Attention is not the same as access. You have given enormous amounts of the first and almost none of the second. And when someone asks for access, the request usually arrives badly. It arrives as an accusation. You never tell me anything. You are so closed off. What is actually being said underneath the poor phrasing is that they cannot find the place where they could hurt you, and until they can find it, they cannot believe they matter. Which means the coldness they name is not a wall they are hitting. It is a door they cannot locate, and there is something specific happening in their body while they search for it. What your composure does inside their body. Consider the other side of the kitchen for a moment, because this pattern has a second casualty, and it is not you. Someone raises their voice at you. You go level. You keep your face steady, your tone even, your questions reasonable. From your side, this is generosity. You are absorbing their state so that the situation does not escalate. You are holding the room. From their side, something quite different occurs, and it happens in the nervous system rather than in the reasoning. They have just expressed distress. Distress, when expressed, expects a response, and the response the body is looking for is not verbal. It is a change in the other person, a shift in breathing, a movement in the face, some sign that the signal was received by a living thing. That is the reflex being invoked, and it is much older than language. When the signal produces no visible change, the body does not conclude that the other person is regulated. It concludes that the signal failed. So it does the only thing an unanswered signal can do. It increases amplitude. They get louder. Then they get cruel, because cruelty is a stronger signal than volume. Then, when cruelty also produces nothing, they go quiet. And the quiet is the dangerous part, because quiet means the system has stopped expecting an answer. And note what your calm does inside their escalation. Your steadiness becomes evidence. They are the unreasonable one. They are the ones shouting while you stand there being fair. So on top of the distress that started this, they now carry the shame of having been the ugly one in a room with someone who behaved perfectly. You did not intend that. It is what your regulation produces in a system that reads absence of change as absence of care. This is why the fight always ends the same way. They apologize for how they behaved. You accept it graciously. The original thing that hurt them is never addressed because it was buried under the mess they made trying to reach you. Nothing gets resolved, and both of you leave the kitchen believing you were the one who behaved well. Repeat that 100 times and something in the relationship stops trying. And repeat it across every relationship you have, and something in you starts to notice how quiet your own life has become. Why nobody ever practices holding you. There is a very particular loneliness that comes with being trusted by everyone. Your phone rings when things go wrong for other people. You are the one who gets told the thing before anyone else knows. You have been present at the worst nights of several people's lives, and you handled all of them well. Your value in every one of your relationships is established, stable, and known. And when something goes wrong in your life, you sit with it by yourself and you tell yourself that this is fine because you handle things better alone anyway. That sentence is worth examining, because it is not a preference. It is a conclusion drawn from evidence, and the evidence was collected honestly. You have tried occasionally. You have opened a small door, mentioned something difficult, watched what happened, and what happened was that the other person became visibly uncomfortable, or minimized it, or turned the conversation back to their own situation, or offered advice so poorly matched to the problem that you spent the next 10 minutes managing their attempt to help. So you learned something true. Most of the people in your life are not equipped to hold you. And this is not a judgment of them. It is a structural fact you helped create. You built relationships, in which you were the container. Nobody in a container-shaped relationship develops the muscle for holding the container. Then you drew a conclusion that was not true. You concluded that this means you should stop trying, and that the loneliness is simply the cost of being capable. Here is what that costs. Being the safe person means being the person whose state nobody checks. Nobody asks how you are and means it, because your fineness is load-bearing for everyone around you. If you were not fine, several people's understanding of their own lives would need revision. So the question does not get asked, and you would not know how to answer it if it were. And underneath all of that sits the thing that makes this pattern so difficult to interrupt. There is a suspicion, rarely spoken, that your usefulness is the entire reason anyone stays. That if you arrived one day empty, needing with nothing to offer and no capacity to hold anyone, the relationships would quietly reveal themselves to have been arrangements. That suspicion has never been tested, which is exactly why it has so much power. And it has been shaping something you may not have noticed at all. What happened to your own reactions over all these years? What happens to a feeling that is never displayed? Somebody asks how you feel about something significant and you find with mild alarm that you have to work it out, not retrieve it. Work it out. You reason toward it. You consider what a person in your circumstances would reasonably feel. You check the facts. You construct a plausible answer and offer it. And it is usually correct, in the way a good inference is correct. It is also assembled rather than reported. This is what decades of processing before displaying eventually produces. The feeling stopped being a signal and became a conclusion. Trace how it happened because it is not mysterious. Emotional awareness works like any other sense, through use, with feedback. You feel something, you express it, the world responds, and the response calibrates the sense. Over time, you learn what your own states mean and what to call them, because they have been out in the open where they could be corrected. Your states were never out in the open. They were routed inward, examined privately, and resolved before anyone else could see. Nothing ever came back, and the sense never got calibrated against anything but your own analysis of itself. So you developed an extraordinary instrument for reading other people, tested constantly, corrected daily, refined over decades, and alongside it, a nearly untested instrument for reading yourself. You can tell within seconds that the person across from you is more frightened than angry. You could not say with any confidence what is going on in your own chest at this moment. That imbalance produces a strange kind of life. You are certain about everyone and provisional about yourself. Your own preferences are inferences. Your own anger is a hypothesis. You find out you were hurt 3 days later, usually by noticing that you have been avoiding someone, and there is a delay effect that makes it worse. Feelings that were never displayed do not disappear. They arrive late, detached from their cause, disguised as something else. A flat week with no explanation, exhaustion out of proportion to the work, an unaccountable irritation at someone who has done nothing, a sudden, total unwillingness to answer a message from a person you love. Those are the reports arriving from a system that was not permitted to report in real time, which finally brings this to the only question that changes anything, and it is not how to feel more. It is how to be reachable without becoming the thing you were trained to prevent, how to be warm without being reactive. The trap in all of this is a false choice, and it needs dismantling before anything else can move. The choice appears to be between staying regulated and becoming the kind of person who erupts, between composure and the raised voice you spent your childhood managing. Put that way, nobody would choose differently than you have. Of course, you keep the calm. You have seen what the alternative does to a room. But reactivity is not the opposite of what you do. Reactivity discharges a feeling outward at another person. What is missing from your relationships is not discharge. It is disclosure. Those are different operations, and only one of them requires anyone to be shouted at. Disclosure means the feeling gets reported while it is still happening, in a plain sentence, without being converted into an insight first. That is the whole intervention, not more emotion. Timing. Try the actual mechanics because vague instruction is useless here. Someone says something that lands hard. The old sequence runs immediately. Feel the spike, understand the cause, produce the level response. The intervention goes between the first and second step, and it is one sentence long, spoken before the analysis completes. That landed harder than I expected. I am angry and I do not fully know why yet. Something in what you said hurt, and I need a moment before I respond well. Look at what those sentences have in common. None of them accuses anyone. None of them requires the other person to manage you. None of them is a demand. And critically, none of them is finished. Each one reports a state that is still in progress, which is exactly the material you have never handed to anyone. Be clear about what this will feel like. Dangerous. Not awkward, dangerous. Because you are doing the precise thing the old system was built to prevent. Showing an unresolved state to another person while it is still unresolved. Every instinct will insist on completing the processing first and offering the clean version. The clean version is the problem. The clean version is what has been read as coldness for 20 years. And there is one more piece, which is what to do when the other person is escalating and you can feel the calm arriving like a shield. Say the true thing about the calm itself. Something in this is making me go flat, and I do not want to go flat with you. Naming the mechanism out loud is the only way it stops looking like indifference from the outside. None of this requires you to stop being perceptive. It requires you to stop being the only person in the room who cannot be seen, which leaves one last thing to understand, and it is about what you have been protecting all along. What it means to arrive instead of manage. Go back to the kitchen one final time and change one detail. The sharp sentence has just landed. You feel it exactly as before, the heat, the unfairness, the hook. And this time, instead of putting it down behind your ribs and producing the reasonable question, you stay where the feeling is for 3 more seconds and say the plain thing. That hurt. Give me a moment. Notice what has not happened. You have not shouted. You have not withdrawn. You have not become the unpredictable person whose mood decides the evening. The house you grew up in is not being recreated. The only thing that has changed is that the other person is now standing in a room with someone who can be affected. That is what they have been looking for the entire time. Not a reaction, evidence. And this is the part worth carrying out of here, because it reframes everything the accusation implied. You were never cold. You were the most affected person in most of the rooms you have ever been in, and you built a mechanism so effective at converting that impact into usable calm that the impact stopped being visible even to you. What people met was the output. The cost stayed in the private room where all your processing has always happened. The word cold was inaccurate, but the loneliness that produced the word was completely real, and it belonged to both of you. What changes is not your depth. Your depth was never in question. What changes is the direction of the flow, and it changes one plain sentence at a time, said early, said unfinished, said to someone who has spent years wondering whether they were the only one in the relationship who could be reached. You have spent an entire life being the person who could hold anything. The question that remains is quieter than that and harder. What would it be like to be held once badly by someone who did not do it as well as you would have, and to let that be enough? That is not a lesser skill than the one you already have. It is the one you were never taught, and it is still available.